The ASX has been smashed as it hits its lowest level since mid-December, wiping out almost $90 billion in value today as oil surged past 100 US a barrel. Joining me now is former Treasury Assistant Secretary David Pearl. David, great to see you again. Well, how much of this sell-off is panic and how much is a rational response to the war?
Look, I think a large part of the sell-off is panic, but the panic was understandable to some extent because just after trading started this morning on the Sydney Stock Exchange, the price of crude oil spiked by up to 30%, following reports that some Middle Eastern producers had reduced output because of the difficulties in the Strait of Hormuz. So there was a degree of panic there. I should remind your listeners that I was on your program about this time last year, April, when the stock market fell by more than it did today following Donald Trump's Liberation Day. And my comment then, accepting that I can't predict the future, was that we shouldn't panic, and I think I'd apply that now.
If the Strait of Hormuz does stay blocked, and I agree we shouldn't panic and hopefully this is just temporary, but if it does stay blocked, then how quickly does this hit households and interest rates?
Well, the Strait of Hormuz, as you and your viewers probably know, accounts for about 1/5 of trade in oil. But there are other routes as well. So Australia can import oil and get it shipped from the US. Of course, any adjustment away from the Straits will take time and add to cost. But I think there are three reasons why the chance of a prolonged disruption to oil supply may not be as great as some people think. One, Iran's capacity to disrupt oil supply is being degraded day by day with the attacks from the US and Israel. Iran's allies, Russia and China, have not, as far as I understand, provided any military assistance. Two, the big oil producers, including Saudi Arabia, want to ramp up production to keep prices lower, not cut it. And three, I don't think Donald Trump, facing the midterm elections in 8 months, could stomach politically a major oil price shock in the US. Now, I'm not saying that there's no risk. Clearly there is. Half of the world's oil supplies are situated in the Middle East and the Strait of Hormuz is sensitive. But I do think that there are reasons to be cautiously confident.
Yeah, and I think Trump has said repeatedly he wants this to be relatively quick. That's what his MAGA base will accept. You know, they want to be an in and out 4 weeks, 5 weeks, maybe 2 months at the max if they achieve their objectives, although he is committed to whatever time it takes, he said. But you're right, he doesn't want this stretching on months and months and months. But I just want to ask you about the impact then on inflation, so not just immediate petrol prices.
Oh, look, absolutely. And as you and your viewers know, Sharri, we've got an entrenched inflation problem in Australia. Inflation has been higher than the RBA's 2 to 3% band for 17 from the last 18 quarters. So even before any shock to global oil markets, we have a serious inflation problem. And we have a central bank that I think is still in denial about its role in prematurely cutting rates last year. And we've talked about that on your program before. So coming into this oil uncertainty and inflation uncertainty reflected in much higher bond yields for Australian government debt, we've got a serious inflation problem. So I do think that complicates the job for the RBA board next week. I think their credibility is hanging by a thread even before this war started in Iran, and I think their hand is going to be forced next week. The bond market traders are betting on much higher inflation in Australia. You can interpret the yields that way. And I think Michelle Bullock has to act sooner rather than later to stop inflation expectations starting to elevate, because once that happens, Sharri, interest rates have to go much higher, as you know, and we get 5, 6, 7, 8% unemployment. We don't want that.
The issue is that no matter what happens in the Middle East, even if this is a short issue that's resolved quickly, it still gives the Albanese government now an excuse. They'll say, you know, if they don't get inflation under control, they'll just blame global factors, as always. David Pearl, good to have you on the show. Thanks so much.